weekend. Mrs. Piper Windmill pulled her face together with a snap as the sound of a horn announced the arrival of her first guest. She glided to the window on her very smallest roller skates, just in time to see the Stillington Hall pop out of the shadow of an old Lincoln, with Spotty, their meanest thoroughbred. This made Mrs. Piper Windmill furious, because it showed up her own zipper-bottom Sealingham to great disadvantage. Already her jolly little Georgian house was full of misfits, but she glided amongst them quite unconsciously. While her famous blue-nose cocktails were being served that put everybody in a foul mood. Ex-husbands and wives were always popping up in her house behind a bowl of Hamburg grapes or behind a monogrammed Turkish towel. She had a schedule for every waking moment. These were printed at Cartier's at enormous expense. Tennis for those who had never held a racket. Horses for those who had never seen a pummel. And backgammon every night at enormous stakes. She called this the Locust Valley Tournament. She loved the name. And an organized dash for the White Garden at high noon to feed the swans. On everyone's dresser was a package of swan's food with the words, "Be kind to our web-footed friends." Now it was during the organized dash for the White Garden at high noon to feed the swans that Muriel Applejack arrived with a very decent speed cop called Pat Kelly. Muriel never knew where she was going to find herself in the country. Invitations meant nothing to her because she never had any. Now after the swans had almost been choked to death on peanut brittle, and the gloomy house guests were climbing the wet flags, praying for telegrams, Muriel burst into the room in an old turtleneck sweater, with Pat looking more like Mrs. Windmill's father in his rowdy days than was good for Mrs. Windmill. She took one look at her Cartier special and collapsed, falling rather heavily on one of her zipper-bottom Sealinghams, which popped the little animal open. And out came a Dr. West toothbrush and a pair of folding Pullman slippers. It was then that the Stillington Halls tried so hard to be simple and failed. Spotty, the meanest thoroughbred of them all, forgot himself on the wrong end of a prayer rug. Many of the guests plunged into the indoor pool, never to be seen again. But Muriel loved it all. She loved anything out of the ordinary. She said to Pat, "You know, Mrs. Windmill is French provincial up to a point, and then she just goes comfortable. I'm sleeping in the L tonight overlooking the stuffed dog kennel, and you're sleeping in the garage in Mr. Chrysler's airflow. But don't forget where I am." The next morning, when Mrs. Piper Windmill was struggling to see the sunrise over her imported box in Virginia, but it was even too beautiful for her, Angus, her tried old butler from Surrey, England, burst into the room, his face a mass of elemental passion. "Mrs. Piper Windmill, Mrs. Piper Windmill, Mrs. Applejack is having a policeman in her coffee for breakfast. A great big policeman. We don't do this in England, we drink tea." Mrs. Windmill's sunrise suddenly went black, and she clutched what little neck she had left as Angus bellowed on. "And they both wish me to tell you they've never had such a night anywhere on Long Island."